I thank the Chairman very much for calling this very, very important hearing, and personal welcome to our very, very distinguished three experts today. The first question we should consider at today's hearing is which Palestinian Authority we're talking about, since there appears to be two of them. This is quite apart from the terrorist Hamas, which is a de facto authority in Gaza by way of perpetuating a military coup. The PA itself exhibits the kind of contradictory behavior that, in a person, might be diagnosed as a split personality disorder. So what do we make of this Jekyll and Hyde government? On the one hand, under the leadership of President Mahmoud Abbas and Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, the PA has ceased to be a coordinator and instigator of terror, and now combats it with growing efficacy and professionalism. On the other, Abu Mazen, as President Abbas is also known, has agreed to a unity agreement with the blood-soaked terrorists in Hamas who have never, not even for the briefest of moments, never considered or diminished or revised their insistence on Israel's utter annihilation and the glory of using violence against Israeli civilians. This political reconciliation agreement may well never be implemented, as both major Palestinian factions, Abu Mazen's Fatah and the terrorist Hamas, may have a greater interest in the concept of reconciliation than its implementation. Nonetheless, I would suggest to the PA leadership that when you get into a cage with a tiger, you're not a partner, you're a lunch. Fatah leaders may think they have worked out a deal for a merger. They should consider the possibility that their more vicious counterparts in Hamas think they've got a deal for an acquisition. Abu Mazen, the PLO, and his Fatah faction are all officially in favor of peace, support the Oslo Accords, and the other subsequent Israeli-Palestinian agreements. I, like many of my colleagues, have often met with and spoken with Abu Mazen, his key advisors, and with Prime Minister Fayyad as recently as 2 weeks ago. It becomes obvious immediately that their goal is to create a Palestinian state living side by side with Israel. These are men interested in creating a new Palestinian state, not in destroying the existing Israeli one. Nevertheless, as continues to be regularly documented, the PA, Abu Mazen's Fatah faction, and senior Fatah leaders continue to glorify terrorists and fail to recognize in both ways, large and small, Israel's existence and its right to live in peace and security. Incitement and the ongoing failure of Palestinian leaders to speak frankly with the Palestinian public about the need for give and take in negotiations continues to raise questions about Palestinian intentions. It's long past time for this convenient ambiguity to be resolved clearly and finally regarding the unacceptability of violence and the need for sacrifices on both sides to achieve peace. And while Abu Mazen may continue to insist that Palestinians are still committed to directly negotiating a two-state solution to the conflict with Israel, his actions demonstrate a very different and dangerous alternative approach. The current Palestinian campaign to seek bilateral recognition around the world, culminating in September with an effort to force a vote in the UN on Palestinian statehood, is fraught with peril for all parties concerned, most of all the Palestinians. The Palestinian leadership seems to be running headlong off a cliff because it can't figure out how to do what they probably already know would be best, to sit down for direct negotiations with Israel. And so, we in the United States, as the chief sponsor of the peace process and Israel's key ally, need to figure out where we, in the light of our own fiscal realities, have to draw some red lines to get this process back on track, to keep it from getting out of control. I would suggest that there should be three requirements for our assistance based not only on our interests and views of sound policy, but consistent with our own current political realities. First, this reconciliation deal was, is, and will remain a bad idea. Palestinians may like the idea of their leaders all getting along and may be willing to live with the contradiction of a government half committed to peace and half committed to attacking school buses with anti-tank missiles. But we are not, and we never will be. As a matter of both law and basic decency, we never do business with or provide aid to a government controlled by or reporting to terrorists, period. Full stop. Number two, if you represent a party that says it's in favor of peace through negotiations, then it's not unreasonable to expect you to engage in direct negotiations for peace. Abu Mazen, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is waiting for you. The proposed initiative to force the issue of statehood at the UN is a clear and material breach of the Oslo Accords and a dangerous proposition for all parties. It needs to be shelved, and direct talks need to begin. No one but the Palestinian leadership is forcing the issue to the UN, and no one but the Palestinian leadership can pull the plug on this misbegotten idea. American aid is intended to support the peace process. If the Palestinian leadership unwisely chooses to abandon that process in favor of running after the illusion of statehood at the UN, that decision will likely come with an annual price tag in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and more expensively, the loss of any claim to common sense. Finally, the PA needs to get its act together with regard to its public communications, media approach, and official attitude regarding peace and the use of violence. The view of its senior leaders in favor of peace through negotiations needs to be consistently represented in all areas in which the PA acts, whether in the PA media outlets, the naming of streets, or grant awards, or school books. The PA can't wink and nod at the glorification of terrorism here and there and expect the world not to get out, the word not to get out, and that it will not have consequences. Incitement is not a phony issue. It speaks to intentions and undermines confidence in the Palestinian leadership will, given the issues of reconciliation and the UN initiative is already severely strained. Since 2000, Israeli governments under Prime Ministers Barak and Olmert have offered Palestinians full-blown peace offers. Prime Minister Sharon orchestrated Israel's unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, and Prime Minister Netanyahu instituted the first-ever freeze on settlements solely as an act of good faith. It's time for Abu Mazen to find the same kind of courage in his own convictions and find a way to get back to the negotiating table. History is waiting for him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.